Okay, morning everyone. So just a little bit of information about myself. So my name's Melissa, as I said. I'm a senior welfare benefits advisor here at Irwin Mitchell. There's some contact details on the screen there. Should you need anything or have any follow-up questions, I'm happy to answer any follow-up questions. So here at Irwin Mitchell, we have a full welfare benefits team. We do absolutely everything that you can think of in terms of welfare benefits, right from that initial benefits check to check that a client is receiving everything that they are eligible for. We do applications, we do assessments, and we go all the way to tribunal. We do everything in between, and we do this for all welfare benefits that you can think of. So personal independence payment, attendance allowance, DLA, carers allowance, universal credit, tax credits, council tax, blue badge, all of the benefits that you can think of, legacy benefits as well. We're a team of 8 here at Irwin Mitchell, and we cover the whole country. I'm based in Newcastle, but we've got people all over. So should you need anything or have any follow-ups, that could be something that we can look to help. So what are we going to cover today? So the topics that we'll cover, I've tried to pick out the top sort of topics that we get asked about, the things that we most deal with here within our welfare benefits team. So that will be disability living allowance, the transition from DLA to PIP when a client reaches 16, personal independence payment, universal credit, that's a big one at the moment, carers allowance, council tax, and then blue badges. So let's get going. So the first benefit that we'll talk about is disability living allowance. So this is a non-means tested benefit. It's for disabled children under the age of 16. You may still have some people that do receive DLA that are over 16 because it's quite a historic benefit, and this was in place before PIP became a thing. So you might still we still have some clients here that are even in the 60s, 70s, still receiving DLA, and that's okay if they still receive that. But for a brand new application, it would only be a disabled child under 16. So the 3 disability benefits, which are DLA, PIP, and attendance allowance, are in place to give the person the funding they need to meet their needs. If they've got any additional needs, if they need any additional equipment and support, that is the benefit that is there to do that and put that in place for them. That's why it's not means tested. So it would be a child under 16. They look at the difficulties with walking, or more so than a child of the same age who does not have a disability. The mobility component, the child must be at least 5 years old or 3 years old if they have additional needs that cause physical problems when walking. If you are applying for a DLA before the child has reached 3 years old, in the application, you need to be really clear the extra support that they get more so than a child of the same age, just because a child under 3 would need support from their parents or family or carers anyway. So you need to prove that additional element of need. So what is DLA? So there are 2 elements of DLA. That's the care and the mobility component. And then within those 2 components, there are rates. So within the care component, there are 3 rates. That's the lower rate, the middle rate, and the higher rate. And then the mobility rate just has the two components. So that's the lower and the higher part. So for each of those different components and each of those different rates, that would be entitled to a different amount of money for each different rate. So what do they look at for those different components? So for the care component, really what they're looking at is how much care is that person requiring. So they're looking at, is it care during the day? Is it care during the night? Is it both? How many times do they need care during the night? What type of care are they getting during the day? All of those different types of things. For mobility, again, it's looking at, as it says on the tin as such, with walking. Do they struggle with walking? Do they have any aids walking? Are they struggling to walk? All of those different kind of things. However, what isn't so obvious with the term mobility is what they also look at is behavioural difficulties. So particularly with a child maybe with a brain injury or neuro difficulties, how is their behaviour impacting on their ability to walk? For example, are they needing to be physically restrained near a road because they're unsafe and they might step out into the road? Are they needing extra things at home, like locks on the windows, safety gates outside to prevent them running outside? All of those different things which they also consider to get into that higher rate bracket for the mobility component. So again, it's not just what it says on the tin with that. Yes, it's about the ability to walk, but also the wider scope of the difficulties that they're having. So when you do that application, the application process is that you would make a call on the phone, and then it's quite a lengthy paper application. Within that application, I would advise to put in as much information as you possibly can, examples, speak to the GP if they've got any information. If you're a therapist, if they've got a therapist, provide a statement as to the care that they're receiving. And one top tip that we say is that mum or dad, or if there's particularly like a family member that is providing a lot of care, if they can provide a statement, even if it's just an A4 piece of paper, Monday to Saturday, exactly the care that they've provided on those days, that's often the best piece of evidence, because that's on the ground, real information that the DWP can consider when making those decisions for DLA. So that takes me to the end of DLA. We'll come on to questions and things at the end. So the next sort of part of the process of disability benefits would be that transition from DLA to PIP if you've got a child who is turning 16. So if they're already in receipt of DLA, the child should receive a letter, or the appointee should receive a letter from the DWP asking for them to transfer over to PIP. Unfortunately, it's not automatic. It does have to be another call and another application form and another potential assessment. Again, it's not so straightforward. They're asking for these additional pieces of information, and it would be that call. But the good thing is, and what I would advise is, if you're making that application and it seems like quite difficult because you're having a brand new claim, you can ask that the DWP transfer the data and the information and the records that they've got on the DLA claim over to the PIP claim, which means at least they've got a little bit of background information or some medical history, and they're not making a brand new decision without any of that information. I therefore will talk about PIP next. So you've made that brand new claim. DLA will continue to be paid until the PIP decision has been made. This is for someone age 16 to state pension age. So we're going right through that bracket now. The client can still receive past state pension age if they were already receiving PIP when they reach state pension age. And quite often that's the financially better thing to do, because when you get to attendance allowance post state pension age, that only has one component, so they're not going to get financially as much money as they would if they received personal independence payment. So although a brand new claim couldn't be made for PIP past state pension age, if they're already receiving that, we always recommend, it's highly likely that they should continue to receive PIP rather than switching to attendance allowance, because that's financially better. So PIP is similar to disability living allowance. It's not means tested, again for the same purpose of providing that additional payment. The two elements are of the same sort of thought. So there's the daily living component and the mobility component. The difference is that rather than the 3 rates for the care component of DLA, there's only 2 rates for both of those components of PIP. Now, what they look at for those different components to get those different rates is slightly different again to DLA. So the difference is they look at 12 different descriptors. There are 10 descriptors for the daily living component and 2 for the mobility component. So for the mobility component, they look at the ability to plan and follow a journey, and also the moving around. So again, similar to DLA, it sounds like it's just about the ability to walk, but actually it's a wider perspective than what they're looking at, particularly with the planning and following a journey for someone with sort of any brain injury or cognitive difficulties. It's their ability to go somewhere unfamiliar. Do they need help with planning a journey? Do they need someone to always be with them? Would they go anywhere alone? Are they anxious going anywhere unfamiliar? Are they anxious even going anywhere? Do they need support with even a familiar journey? All of those different things are looked at for that mobility component, as well as the ability to walk. Now, going to the daily living component, this is much wider. So they look at 10 different descriptors. These are preparing food, eating and drinking, managing medication and therapy, washing and bathing, dressing and undressing, communicating, reading, mixing with others, and budgeting. These look at the help that someone needs, prompting, any aids, how they feel when they're doing that. And they look at all of this across sort of an average basis. So they want to know how many days a week is that impacting you. Really, it needs to be the majority of days that this is impacting the person. Again, similar to the DLA application, I would advise to put as much information as you can. Use examples, use those evidence, get a therapist to write a statement, all of those different kind of things to try and make it as easy as possible when they're making that decision. So again, similar to DLA, it's a claim over the telephone. They would then send a PIP2 application, and then it would be an assessment. The assessments have changed a little bit since the pandemic. We used to be very much in person. There was no telephone claims or anything at all. It's all changed very much. We have video assessments, we have telephone assessments, and the occasional in person. Again, just a top tip with that, if you have a client or your family member or whoever it is, if you think they've been called for, let's say, a face-to-face assessment and you think that's not quite suitable, they might have some reason that they can't go out and it would be better for them to be at home and have it over the telephone, you can request that. Just request that with the assessors, and they really need to meet that person's needs in order to do that assessment. Following the assessment, probably 6 to 8 weeks later, hopefully, depending on their timescales, they do often have backlog, but you will get then a decision with that personal independence payment. That decision letter should state the rates, it should state those points. It's a points-based system for each of those different descriptors. So you need 8 points for the standard rate of daily living or mobility, or 12 points for the enhanced, and that's not combined, that's for each different component. So 8 in each one or 12 in each one. Following that decision, hopefully the person gets the right decision the first time, but then there is an appeals process to follow. We'll cover that at the end because that sort of crosses all benefits, so we'll cover a little bit on the appeals process as well. So that's sort of the information on personal independence payment. We'll now cover universal credit. I'll just have some water, it's very hot today. So universal credit, let's go with this. So I'm sure you've heard about it and seen it all over the news, and I have got many questions about it. This is the number one thing that we're asked about at the moment. So it was brought in quite a few years ago. The idea behind it was to replace income-related ESA, income-related JSA, income support, tax credits, and housing benefit. So these are known as the legacy benefits. So when I'm talking about the legacy benefits going forward, these are the ones that I'm referring to. The idea was to create one single benefit to cross all of those, rather than having all of those different bits and bats. So you could previously have someone receiving multiple of those, but the idea was to bring it all into one and roll it all into one system. Historically, and how it was rolled out was that people had a choice to make universal credit claims, and it was rolled out postcode by postcode across the country. That was done for quite a few years, and then over the past sort of 2 or 3 years, maybe we've been in a position where so you could make a choice, or if you haven't claimed one of those benefits before, you would then make a universal credit claim, or if someone's circumstances have changed, that would then trigger a universal credit claim. So if someone had someone moving in or out of the property, they had a baby, they moved out, lots of different change of circumstances, that would end their previous claim for legacy benefits and trigger a brand new claim for universal credit. That is now changing. So that process is coming to an end, and we're now going into a process of what's called managed migration. So the government want everybody off all of those legacy benefits fully onto universal credit. That has been rolled out now, and it's been rolled out benefit by benefit. We'll go through the timescales. I've got a different slide on the different timescales in a minute. But yeah, that is coming into force from, well, it started with tax credits a couple of months ago. So if you've got people who receive just tax credits, you've probably likely seen some migration notices and those coming through. But as we get later in the year, it's been rolled out to different claimants. So we'll cover that in that slide in a moment. In terms of making the claim, so it is either an online or a telephone claim. Again, the government changed it, and this is very different to legacy benefits that were all managed over the phone, but they tried to sort of move with the times and make everything an online claim. But again, as I said previously, if for whatever reason that doesn't work for your client or family member, that doesn't have to be the case. You can request a telephone only claim if that's best for that person. One top tip in relation to making the claim, they will ask 2 security questions at the start of the claim. It's usually things like the colour of your first car, or the name of your child or best friend, or first film that you'd seen at the cinema, that kind of thing. I would advise that you do everything you can to not lose that security information. If that is lost, it creates such a difficulty with the universal credit claim, which is so unlike the other benefits. Previously, if you lost something, you could just ring up and give your name and national insurance number and pass through security that way, but they're very, very tight with these security questions. Equally, they give you what's called a personal security number when you start the claim. It's like a 16-digit number. That, again, is the backup for those security questions. So if you have a file or some safe or something with these security information, that would be helpful just in case you ever lose that, just to have it there just in case. So in terms of making the claim and what does the universal credit claim look like? So all claims have to be a joint claim if they live with a husband, partner, boyfriend, girlfriend, whoever it is. If they're living with someone as a couple, it must be a joint claim. That takes into account all of their capital, income, savings, anything that they both have together. It's means tested. So if you have, for example, husband working but wife isn't, wife might be disabled, if the husband's income is going to take them over the threshold, unfortunately, the wife isn't eligible either. It is a fully joint claim taking into account all of their circumstances. In terms of means testing, again, it is capital that they take into consideration as well as income. So that is quite different to tax credits previously. So previously, tax credits, you could have an unlimited amount of capital, but they would only consider income, whereas universal credit is going to consider both. Anything over £16,000 for universal credit, that is going to stop eligibility entirely. You have to be below that £16,000. Anything between 6,000 and 16,000 will reduce the amount that you've got. So how is it made up? So what they do when you make a universal credit claim, they will look at your circumstances. So if you've got, for example, a couple living together and they might have one disabled child, one of them might be working, one of them might not be able to work. That is going to take all of their situation into consideration and sort of build upon what was those legacy benefits into the universal credit claim. So they would get a couple rate, which is the standard element. If one of them was unable to work because of a health condition, they would get the limited capability for work and work-related activity element. They would then potentially get the child element. If that child then receives DLA, then they might get the severe disability premium for the child on that child element. If they then, let's say, rented a property rather than the housing benefit element previously, they will get that as part of their universal credit claim. So it depends on their circumstances exactly how much they're going to get, and it's about building up that eligibility. And then what would happen is if they had, let's say husband was working, his income would then reduce that total. So the total that you've got from all of those different bits combined, then deductions because of his income or capital or whatever it is that he's got. Sometimes it may be that that completely wipes out the universal credit claim, that the income or capital is more than what they would be eligible, so they might not be eligible at all. So it's about doing that calculation and checking what they would be eligible for. Just in terms of making the claim and the stages of the claim. So the initial part would be the online journal and making that, signing up on the gov.uk website, or doing it by telephone if that's best for the client. The first stage is about that information gathering, which is really important, going back to the different elements that I was talking about. So in this bit, you would declare if you had housing costs, who you live with, if there's any children, any childcare costs, all of those different things, which then builds up the picture to universal credit of exactly how much that person should be eligible for. Once that bit is done, they will do an ID check just to verify that the person is who they say they are, and get that bit done. Historically, it always had to be done at the job centre. Now we've had occasions where we've asked them to do it by email, or again, if it's not suitable for whoever it is, the client or person you're caring for, to go to the job centre, again, request that they can come to the client's home. They can do it online. There are ways around that now, that it doesn't necessarily have to be that they're doing it in person. So in terms of the capability for work part of the claim, this is vital. This can increase the amount that they receive by £416.19 a month at the moment. So the capability for work part, you would need to submit a fit note if they haven't ever had that before. The difference, if they have received capability for work part of ESA previously, then you can ask for that decision to be transferred over to the universal credit claim, which is then stopping that process of the fit note and then the application form and the assessment, which can be quite lengthy and sometimes quite difficult for the client to go through. So if they have that, I would recommend that you immediately ask Universal Credit to transfer over that capability for work decision. However, if they've never had a capability for work decision previously, or if for some reason there's been a gap in the ESA claim and the Universal Credit claim, then you would need to submit a fit note on the UC journal or advise that over the telephone. Once you've submitted the fit note from the GP, or this can be evidence from a therapist, now it's quite a wide bracket of information that can be submitted to evidence the health condition. They would then send out a UC 50 form. This is probably similar to, you might have seen an ESA 50 form. It's an application form that will go through the 18 different descriptors, looking at the capability for work. That then follows the same process as other benefits, that they would then have an assessment and then a decision. You're looking for the limited capability for work and work-related activity component to increase that. That is quite difficult to meet. They look at, you need 15 points from some of the descriptors singly rather than combined with that to meet that threshold. Or alternatively, one thing that they look at is the risk to that person's health if they were to be found capable of work-related activity. So that is a really important part, to get that initial, when you do that initial claim, get that capability for work part ticked off, because that's quite a big chunk of the money that we'll receive. That's replacing like the ESA element of the legacy benefits. One big difference between universal credit and the legacy benefits is that payments can fluctuate and they will vary. This is because they look at it in real time, month by month, whereas with the legacy benefits, say tax credits, they would only look at it annually. So if you've got someone on a 0-hours contract, or their husband or wife is, their income is going to fluctuate each month. So actually it would just be looked at previously over the whole year, but now it's month by month. So it can be a good and a bad thing. If you've got someone working a 0-hours contract, that's probably going to be more reflective of the income that they need as a top up from universal credit, whereas before it might have not been so reflective. So it can be a good and a bad thing that does fluctuate. In terms of checking that, I would advise that you look at the statement. So once you get up and running with the universal credit claim, if it's an online claim, you have a journal, and it's very much sort of an online system where you can look at a conversation, you can leave notes, you can leave notes for the work coach, you can leave notes querying things, and that has all of the statements on there. You can change things, update things, everything is on that online system. If it's a telephone claim, you'll need to call and request those statements to be sent to you or the client, and then you should check those quite frequently just to make sure that everything looks right, they're receiving all of the elements that they should be, and everything is right. So going back to what I was saying in relation to the date, so April 24, we've gone through this bit. The income support claimants should have had those tax credits and housing benefits. We've now crossed June, so housing benefit only might have started to receive those. And then coming up later in the year, September is going to be the big time in terms of most of certainly my clients and probably people that you guys work with, is the employment and support allowance only claims, income related, will be switching to universal credit. So what happens when you get those switch? So the client will receive what's called a migration notice, and it will specifically say that on the letter. We've had quite a couple of instances where people have been a little bit confused because they've received like information booklets or generic information, and then they've switched too early. But in terms of the migration notice, it will specifically state on the letter migration notice. The client then has 3 months to make that universal credit claim. As with everything DWP, it's not automatic. So if they don't make that switch at that point, they're going to miss out on that benefit. So it's vital that when they get that migration notice, the application is made as soon as possible. So I think that's about it for universal credit. I appreciate people might have questions, but we'll come back to that and we'll whiz through the rest of these and then we'll go from there. Just get some more water. So again, carers allowance is a big one that we get asked about, particularly from family members, and lots of people are providing care. So this is paid to the person doing the caring if someone is in receipt of either PIP daily living component or the care component of DLA at the middle or higher rate. The person doing the caring, they need to care for that person over 35 hours a week and cannot earn more than £151 per week after tax and expenses. So that care can be anything. It doesn't have to be sort of personal care or anything like that. It can be emotional support during the night, any kind of care, 35 hours a week, and then less than the £151 a week income. It does impact at the moment on some other benefits that the clients receive. So, for example, the client can't receive the severe disability premium part of ESA if someone is receiving carers allowance for them. So just be mindful of that if that's a situation that it could impact on some benefits that the client receives. It's an application form on the gov.uk website, and it will just ask information about background details, the person you're caring for, their benefits and that kind of thing, but it's pretty straightforward, the application for that. Another benefit that we talk about quite frequently, so this obviously as part of a benefits review and checking all of the eligibility for benefits, the aim really is to maximize their income and reduce their expenditure. So one big thing is council tax. I'm sure you all know how expensive council tax bills can be. So we try and get these council tax bills down as much as we can. So all of these reductions I'll talk about, they can be applied together. It's not one or the other or sort of pick a mix. It's absolutely all of them can be applied at the same time. So the first one that we'll talk about, because it's the most straightforward, is the disabled band reduction. This is pretty similar across the country in that all local authorities apply this in the same way, whereas some of the others that we'll go on to talk about becomes a little bit complex because they're not always applied the same way, because local authorities do have autonomy over their own council tax schemes. The disabled band reduction, so this is looking at adaptations at the property to meet someone's needs. So things like an adapted kitchen, a wet room, extra space because of a wheelchair, grab rails, like lots of different adaptations of the property can fit into this bracket. And what it does is that reduces the council tax banding. So if the banding is a band D, it will reduce it to a C. If it's a B, it will reduce it to an A. So again, that can reduce quite a bit of money from that council tax bill. It's quite a straightforward application. It's through the local authority website, the relevant one, and they only look at, I've seen it in two ways. They either come out and do an assessment and check that the adaptations are at the property, or they will ask for photographs of it. And to be honest, I've rarely seen this turned down. It's quite a successful, if the adaptations are there, they're there clearly to meet the client's needs. It's pretty straightforward. The next one is slightly different because it is different depending on which local authority the client lives in. The scheme follows the same sort of principles. It's there for income related reduction, so it's income based. So it will take into consideration the income of the entire household and capital as well. So both income and capital for that. It's difficult to give a threshold on this. People often ask me, how much can I earn before I can reach that? It's very difficult to say, but good indicators as to that they might be eligible is that they're receiving income related benefits such as universal credit or the legacy benefits that were income related. That will give a good indication. Each local authority also has a good calculator on their website that's often quite helpful to check if someone would be eligible for the income related reduction. The next one is in relation to carers reduction. So this is for someone who is caring for someone else in the household, but it can't be a child under 18 and it can't be a partner. So realistically, it's probably someone, mum caring for child over 18 or dad caring for child over 18, brother or sister caring for each other, but it can't be a spousal relationship and it can't be a child. That will usually reduce the bill by 25%. But again, that can vary slightly local authority to local authority, so it's worth double checking that on the website. The final one is, I hate this term, it's a horrible term, severely mental impaired reduction. So this is a potential 25% reduction if that person has a severe mental impairment. That could be anything, brain injury, cognitive difficulties, dementia, all the above, absolutely anything you think of in terms of severe mental impairment. That needs to be that the GP signs a form to confirm that the client has severe mental impairment. Again, it's slightly different local authority to local authority how they apply that, in that it sometimes is that you will do the application, send it off to the local authority, they will then send it to the GP, or some of them do it the other way around, that you have to send it to the GP first, then back to the local authority. But it's worth doing for that, again, that 25% reduction. And the only other thing to consider with that is you can't have that in place if there are 2 or more adults that are considered on the bill at the property. So you would need to realistically look at who else is living in the house. One way around it is, let's say you've got mum and dad caring for child who is 19. If mum was then reduced from the council tax bill because she's a carer, that would take out 25%. Then the child is SMI over 19, then that's going to reduce 50% because you're reducing one of the adults and then you're reducing the severely mentally impaired as well. Then if they had a low income, then if they had disabled adaptations at the property, you're looking at really reducing that council tax bill. So there's a good opportunity to apply them all and get that down as much as possible. Now onto blue badge. This is slightly more straightforward. Again, just to help with parking, space in car parks. There are some quite straightforward ways to get the blue badge. One of them is if the client receives higher rate of mobility, that's an automatic blue badge. An application is still needed, but it's quite straightforward in that you just tick the boxes that that's what they receive, provide the evidence of that in the letter of the DLA, and then that is going to be awarded. Again, if they have heavy or bulky equipment to be carried in the car, that's something that meets that criteria. Or if they have 8 points or more for the moving around descriptor of PIP, that is an automatic criteria. The not so automatic criteria is called the hidden impairment. So this is like, let's say they might not meet the moving around points of PIP, but they might have points for things like the planning and following a journey of PIP. If they, I don't know, in danger in a car park, they need extra space, they need carers to get them in and out of the car, all of those different types of things. So that what would trigger an application for a blue badge, but then because it's not automatic, they're likely to have an assessment from the local authority to just check those hidden impairments. Blue badges, again, can be challenged through the local authority if it's turned down initially. We do a lot of blue badge challenges, especially with the hidden impairment. It's difficult, isn't it? With, I'm sure you are all aware, with clients with brain injuries and things, it's not always quite straightforward to evidence that. So yes, I would advise to challenge those if it's not awarded straight away on the hidden impairment. All of those applications for the blue badge are through the local authority as well. So that takes me on to the final bit about the process and appeals. So we've talked a little bit about the processes, we've gone through each different benefit, but I just want to touch on challenging those decisions. So you've gone through the application, you've had the assessment. This is for PIP, DLA, attendance allowance, the capability for work, part of universal credit. It all follows the same sort of procedure. So you get that award back. Let's talk about it as if it's PIP. You get the PIP award back and you think, oh, hold on a minute, I haven't been awarded anything, but I think I should have been. I haven't got any points. And unfortunately, this is very, very frequent. There are bad decisions made. There are bad decision makers. And I say to my clients all the time, if they could do their jobs, I'd be out of a job, because that's the bulk of what I do, is challenging these decisions with the DWP. So the first step at challenging that decision is what's called a mandatory reconsideration request. This is an internal DWP challenge, the first step for them to overturn their decision. How I would do that. So the letter that you get from the DWP with the decision will always say that you have 1 month to make that decision. However, that is not the case. The legislation and the regulations actually state that you have 13 months to make that decision. So our advice and how we operate as a team is that we use as much of that 13 months that we need to try and gather evidence and make the best case argument as to why our client should be awarded PIP at that first mandatory reconsideration request, to save time, to save money, to get the money awarded as soon as possible, all of those things. And a key part of doing that is requesting the medical assessment report. So when the client has that assessment with the DWP, when they've done that initial application, the person doing that assessment will write a report to send the DWP to make clear how they've made the decision, and the client has every right to see that report. That is often the most damning piece of evidence that we have, because they are shocking. They're very copy and paste jobs. They are just talking about things that the client hasn't even said. Sometimes they're completely random information that hasn't even happened. So you can use that as the best evidence to then argue that in your submission for the mandatory reconsideration request. So then you would submit that mandatory reconsideration request to the DWP. They would come back with a decision. Again, the timescales, I could tell you a timescale, but it would be wrong, because we have some coming back within 6 weeks. We've had some that take 18 months to come back. It just depends on what they're doing that day, I think. Sometimes they pick from the top of the pile, sometimes they're doing all sorts. So there's no exact timescales. But when they do come back, hopefully because you've done such a detailed submission and you've argued with the medical assessment report, hopefully that is successful. However, if it's not, then you have a further go at challenging this, which is to tribunal. Again, the letter will say 1 month, but again, you have 13 months from the date of that mandatory reconsideration request. So not from the date of the initial decision, the date of the new mandatory reconsideration request. And again, although you have the 13 months, we find that we rarely use that 13 months at tribunal stage, because you've done such a detailed submission at mandatory reconsideration and you've got all of that evidence that you need. So by the time it comes to challenging at tribunal, you've got it all there, you're good to go, you can send it straight away, which is quicker. Then you have the tribunal hearing. Again, I have some that have taken probably 3 or 4 months, and then I've got one that I've been waiting for almost 2 years. So it is very difficult to say how long the timescales are with those. The good thing is that if it's backdate, if the award then is successful, either at mandatory reconsideration or tribunal, it's then backdated. So in our team last year, we had over £1 million in backdated payments for clients between the 8 of us for how much those missing periods in between challenging decisions. So it is very successful if you do challenge them and use those evidence and use the medical assessment report is my biggest piece of advice with the appeals process.